Wednesday. You know what that means. Time for the Southern California Writers Association Hump Day Book Tour. I'm your host, Maddie Margarita, here with Diana Pardee on tech. Every Wednesday morning, SCWA turns our Facebook page over to a new author to talk about their books and their writing and their career. This morning, we are pleased to have with us Elena Hartwell Taylor, otherwise known as Elena Hartwell, otherwise known as Elena Taylor. Elena has spent several years working in theater as a playwright, director, designer, and educator before turning her storytelling skills to fiction. Her first series, The Eddie Shoes Mysteries, written under the name Elena Hartwell, introduced a quirky mother-daughter crime-fighting duo. When she's not writing or coaching writing, her favorite place to be is at the farm with her horses, Jasper and Radar, or at her home on the middle fork of the, okay, you're going to have to say that for me.
Snoqualmie.
The Snoqualmie River in North Bend, Washington, with her husband, their dogs Polar and Wyatt, and their cats Coltrane and Coco. You must have, sounds like a zoo.
A little bit. It's a menagerie. It is a menagerie.
Elena holds her BA from the University of San Diego, a master's in education from the University of Washington, Tacoma, and a Ph.D. from the University of Georgia. Elena is also a senior editor with Allegory Editing, a developmental editing house, where she works one-on-one with writers to shape and polish manuscripts, short stories, and plays. Yay, good welcome, Elena, or good welcome to see this Monday for me. Good morning and welcome. How's that?
That works.
So you do a lot, and I love, maybe we could talk at another time. I love to talk to developmental editors who also write, because I think that's a whole different thing for people who understand all the pressure and everything, but maybe we could talk about that at another time, because we're here to talk about All We Buried, which is a little departure from your Eddie Shoes mystery, right, series?
Yeah, big departure. Yeah, very different animal. My Eddie Shoes books are they're, you know, they're funny. It's what's funny about murder? Well, mother-daughter crime-fighting duo, right there. There's humor. And All We Buried is definitely, it's been labeled dark and atmospheric. So it's a very different book. And that's actually part of what the name thing is about. My publisher, we talked about it, that any book I put out under Elena Hartwell, there was going to be an expectation of humor. And All We Buried is not a funny book. It's a serious police procedural, small rural town with very dark secrets. It's not violent. I don't have a lot of violence on the page, but it's a very dark, much more suspenseful book. And so part of why we went with this different name was to differentiate between my humorous mysteries and a much different one. So that's how I ended up with Elena Hartwell and Elena Taylor.
I'm a Gemini, so I would understand that. So what brought you, I mean, I love writing humorous mysteries. That's kind of what I write, humorous suspense. But what brought you to write something so different?
It's a great question. And it really stems back to my theater days. And I worked as a playwright for a lot of years before I shifted over to writing fiction. And my plays they had funny lines because I'm funny. I may not prove it today, but I am. I'm funny. And my plays always had very humorous lines, but they were all intensely serious. I wrote about colony collapse disorder with the bees. I wrote a lot about post-traumatic stress disorder in veterans. I wrote a lot of very serious social issue plays. And I had done that for a lot of years with some success. And I finally was sort of exhausted. And so I had always wanted to write a novel, and I've been sort of playing around with some stuff, and out came Eddie Shoes, and her mother, who is the quirky, funny one. I have it sort of flipped around that the mom is the wild card and the daughter sort of the straight man. And it just was such a lovely departure from all the serious stuff that I'd been doing in the stage. And Sue Grafton's one of my favorite authors, Janet Ivanovich, that genre of sort of the lighter, funnier, more humorous stuff. And so I sort of slid right into that lane. But I I had All We Buried actually in my back pocket. It was a book that I worked on a lot longer, had a lot of changes. And it was so, in a lot of ways, even though it was my fourth book out, it was a return to my roots. It was a return to those sort of dramatic roots that I'd had as a playwright. I did have a couple times where I was like, do I need to work some humor into this? Like I felt like I needed to. Yeah. And I didn't. So don't expect a lot of laughs with this book. But it's also a very intense sort of character study, which whether I'm doing it with humor or doing it in more serious, that's sort of my my wheelhouse is really character development. And so there's just a lot of sort of delving into the characters. Yeah. So that's how I.
So where did that come from?
It's not always such a great fascinating question. Like, where does any of this come from, right? How do we tap into this stuff? And so I'm going to give you a really esoteric answer and maybe come back and actually answer what you asked. And my esoteric answer is that I believe that writers tap into cultural unconscious. I do. I believe that writers have an ability to sort of feel what's happening in a larger cultural context, and that the characters that are coming to us are through our innate ability to understand what makes people tick. And so I feel like there's a combination of little things prompt a story, and I'll tell you where Bet Rivers came from. There's little things that prompt a story, but that what we're tapping into is sort of an emotional landscape of people in general. So what happened for me with Bet was I used to live in a little community a little bit closer to Seattle. I'm out in the mountains now, but I used to live a little closer to Seattle, and we had a lake that was supposedly bottomless, and that there was a train at the bottom of this lake. Well, it turns out the lake was not particularly deep. It just was sort of dark and you couldn't see the bottom. And whether or not there's a train engine down there, I don't know. But I became quite fascinated with this concept of what could be hidden in a local lake. And so Bet actually started from that. And I started thinking about, okay, what else could be down in the bottom of this lake? What could be hidden? And who would be the person who would live in this community that's around this lake? And then it became, oh, she's a sheriff, she's young, she's taken over for her father, thinking it's temporary, but he's died, and now she's facing her first murder. All of that happens before the book starts, so I'm not giving anything away. And that it's all going to stem around this lake, and that the body gets found floating in the lake. And so that's how it sort of originated. The name came to me. I can't tell you it just was an inspiration. I'm like, I know her name is Elizabeth, but she goes by Bet, and I know her last name is Rivers, and that's sort of how she formed. So she formed from the idea of this mysterious lake and the body found in it, and who is the one who has to solve this crime, rather than starting with, oh, I have a character, what is she doing? So that was sort of interesting that's how that particular story came to me.
And when you were coming up with the plot and the storyline, was this something that you had? I know you talked about the lake, but I mean, all of the things, the subplots and the moving parts around this, and her deputy and all those other things. Did you plot this out ahead of time? Are you? Oh no, don't tell me.
I'm an organic writer. I'm a totally organic writer. I'm not an outliner. I'm an organic writer, and I respect both styles, but it really is about how people think. So my model that has worked for me, everything I've ever written, and I've tried to do other things and it never works. I end up going back to this. So I'm like, this is me. So I mull quite a bit. I really think on character, story, situation, and before I ever sit down to the computer. So I'll spend quite a while mulling. It could be a couple weeks, it could be a couple months. I have some stuff I've mulled on for years that will one day be a finished product, So I mull and I mull and I mull until I sort of feel like I know what the opening looks like. And then I sit down at the computer and I write the opening. And I write forward until I feel like I'm not quite sure where this is going. And then I write the end. And I write the ending, right? I've done work where I kind of know the arc of the story in my head. And so I may not know quite how they get there, but I know what I'm writing to. And so then I write the ending. And then once I know that, I go back to where I'd left off and I write forward to the end of the book. And so what I end up with is a big hot mess, and it's, you know, things are out of order and there's big holes and all of that, but I have the arc down on the page. And then I start rewriting, and I rewrite and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. And, you know, when people say to me, oh, I've rewritten like 5 times, I'm like, rewrite 50 and come back and talk to me. You
Then
know,
you might be ready to start rewriting again.
then you might be ready to go back to your desk. Now, obviously, people who spend 6 months creating a really solid outline, their first draft is going to be like my 50th, right? Because I've done all that work they did outlining, I'm doing on the page. But that's just how I think. It's totally an organic process. And again, like kind of a mystery, but it happens and it works. So, and it's like Lee Child does that. So I'm like, hey, I'm in good company.
You don't want to mess with Lee Child. There's some kind of alchemy there. I'm not sure. So what is it about, from your perspective, what is it about All We Buried that's different maybe from some of the other books that are out there in a similar genre?
Oh, what a great question. I mean, it's rural and Pacific Northwest, which already kind of puts it in a little bit of a different category, because we out here on the left coast, we don't have quite the same attention, I think, as other places in the country. And I think that's sort of a combination of where people are writing from and who big name authors are, and all those sorts of things. But you know, our Seahawks were long ignored as being a great football team, and I think a lot of that was regional, right? It was like, oh, it's the Seattle, they don't know how to play football, and Russell Wilson would argue that. So partly I think it's place. So it's high in the Cascade Mountains. It's a tiny rural town. It's based on some real places, but it is fictional. So I think that sets it apart. Obviously, we're seeing more and more female sheriffs, female detectives, and things like that. And we have a long history. But I do think it's a little bit different to have a young woman who's faced with, should she replace her father, as long, you know, this town has always had a Rivers as a sheriff, and she's faced with, do I continue that line as the first woman to take this over?
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit unique. So I would say, like, the environment that this story takes place in, the context, sets it apart from other things. But having said that, if you like a good, you know, rural, atmospheric, police procedural murder mystery, this would be in your wheelhouse.
And then where is Eddie Shue's set?
So that's a good question. So the first book is set in Bellingham. Eddie Shoes lives in Bellingham, and Bellingham, for people who don't know, is a college town up near the Canadian border. It's sort of the last big town before you cross into Canada, and it's a college town. It's funky. It's a great town. Lovely place to kill people. But technically only about one person.
I'm sorry, that was a great throwaway line. But
great place to kill. Well, you know, because think about it. It's right on the border. You can take a boat, you can take a ferry, you can take a train, you can take a car. There's a ton of ways to get out of town. You know, you can flee the country. Like, it is a great place to kill people.
Making us nervous right now, Elena.
Right? Only people who live up there. But statistically, they only have about a murder or two a year. And so my first book was set there. And then my second book is set in, it starts in Bellingham, but it shifts over to another community. And I was like, you know, I can't have 3 murders take place in a short period of time. So the third book, I send her on vacation. And so there's a murder in a little town called Leavenworth, which is a Bavarian style town and a real place. And that was a blast. So I was like, well, I got to kill some, otherwise I'm going to be Cabot Cove.
I was just going to say Cabot Cove. I don't think that the Chamber of Commerce appreciated that very much.
No. But that's how I ended up in a different town for book 3.
Well, you know, I want to thank you so much for being here with us this morning. So where can people buy your books? Where can people buy All We Buried, and also your humorous mysteries, your Eddie books?
And yeah, thank you for that. So All We Buried is available in hardback, ebook, and Audible, and so audiobook. And so that can be bought at any book outlet. You can order it online. You can go to your local bookstore and request it if they don't carry it. I'm carried in a lot of libraries as well. I actually have gotten the rights back to my Eddie Shoes Mysteries. So you can get the first two are still available on audio, or you can contact me directly at Elena Taylor author at gmail.com. And I hope to have news going forward about the re-release and book 4 of the Eddie Shoes Mysteries.
Great. We're going to go ahead and put your website on Facebook and in the YouTube video also comments. So people will be able to know where they can find those books. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Continued success with All We Buried. And I would love to come back. I hope you come back and talk to us not only about developmental editing, but the experience of doing an audiobook and having somebody else interpret your work. Because I think that's always an interesting conversation. I hope you'll come back.
I will. I'd love to. Thanks for having me.
Right. Well, thank you. And thank you everybody for being with us this morning. Hopefully you enjoyed our video. If you'd like to see it again and share it, you can find it on our YouTube channel, which is SCWA Writers Online. Or if you joined us on Facebook, you can also just share this video on Facebook as well. We have not only this interview with Elena, but there are other similar interviews in that they're authors. That's probably where the similarity ends. So we hope that you'll stay safe and join us again. I'm Maddie Margarita, and this is the SCWA Hump Day Book